I was seeing off a friend actually. So at the time, I'd gone to stay for a few days with my sister because I was down on my luck. I was running out of work and I was running out of money. And my sister said, "Look, you look in a pretty bad way. Come and hang out with us." So I did. And I just met this girl a few weeks prior to that in London, and she came up and stayed with me for a few days. So she got to get back to London. So I went down to the rail station to see her off. I helped her on to the carriage with her bags, and gave her one last hug and a kiss to say goodbye. And then the buzzers went, for the doors to start closing. So I stepped back, and I misjudged it. And the bottom part of my coat, well, I didn't misjudge it actually. I mean, I just they just slammed to really quick, and it just caught the bottom corner of my coat, and just as I stepped back, that was it. It was jammed and I couldn't pull it free. And I was tugging like mad, And I looked around for a guard on the platform and I couldn't see one. I was just thought, what's going on? There should be a guard, but there wasn't. And so I just yelled at the top of my voice, hoping that somebody from the station would come running through. And the engine started to rev up. I started hitting the buzzers on the sides. They didn't work. Nobody came through, running through the carriage or anything. Then I just looked into the eyes of my friend Anna, and I just saw, when I saw the look in her eyes and on her face, I just thought, this is it, it's over. I'm not going to survive this. I'm going to die. So it was really odd because, it's like normally, if you think about it, most accidents happen so quick you haven't got time to even contemplate it. Whereas with this, I got actually moments to think it through, that it was all about to unfold before my eyes, And the train started pulling out of the platform, out of the station, sorry, and it pulled out at a terrific speed. They go really quite fast. You don't realise when you're sat inside, you're normally on your mobile phone or whatever straight away out and you're like texting. Whereas when you're on the outside of it, it's incredibly fast and I just lost my footing eventually and I got dragged along the platform. Then I got pulled between the edge of the platform itself and then sucked down. And it was like, it was just like sort of being pulled down into the gates of hell. It was just like from that moment into the sheer darkness, and it was a very violent experience. I was just tossed around relentlessly like a rag doll, and I just felt like it was me. I was just like this. I was very aware that I was just flesh and bones at that point, and that the train was like this huge mechanical beast, that was just going to eventually kill me. And it was just, it was very terrifying. But I suddenly found myself thrown to the ground as the train was still relentlessly going on. So I just kind of I thought, just keep your head down, because part of the undercarriage could have just come and whacked me over the back of the head, and that would have been it. It would all been over, And that didn't happen clearly, and eventually the train moved on, and the train was still going on. It was a very long train. Then eventually it went down, and I remember just lying there, and I couldn't believe I'd survived that. I couldn't believe I was alive, because there was no guard on the platform, but there was somebody in like a little office with with cameras watching the trains pull out, and she was in charge of signalling, and so she shut down the whole system, which I didn't know that. I wish I'd known it, because as I had laid there, all I could think was, there's another train going to come, it's not all over yet. And but the paramedics arrived really quick. There was a small hospital nearby, so they arrived. They jumped down onto the track and they cut through my clothing, and they somehow got me onto a stretcher and into an ambulance. It's a long drop. So then my family arrived. They got there, so it was just it all seemed kind of surreal, because the surgeon said, "Are your family here? Would you like to see them?" I was going, "Yeah," So they came in and they were really distraught, of course. I mean, my mother was, in tears, and it was so funny because she was crying, and I said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. It's always me bringing all the drama into this family." She said, "It's not your fault," which it wasn't my fault at all, but it was just, you can see now just where I was at in my life before, that I always felt like a failure, and I just felt like this, this sort of like burden. But the ambulance, I remember the doctor turning around to me and saying, "Look, there's a hospital around the corner, but the one that's really going to save you is a 25-minute drive. Can you hang on? I said, yeah, let's go. So we just sped off down the highway, you know, with the sirens blasting out. That moment that we all dread, that, you know, whenever we hear an ambulance go by, I always think, well, I hope that's not going to be me one day. And there I was. It was me. And we arrived at the hospital, and I remember there was a whole team of medics and people waiting for me there. You know, they'd been alerted from the station, and they got to work on me straight away. There was a lot of anxiety in their voices, you know, and confusion. I didn't know what was going on because it was all science to me, and I didn't know what they were talking about. So I was scared, you know. I thought it's not all over yet, you know. This I'm not sure that I'm going to survive this, because I was losing a lot of blood by this point, you know. I remember it being all over the floor. I remember my left arm had been cut, you know, from the elbow down, and so there was lots of blood loss from there. First thing I did, because when I was lying on the track, you know, just like as we all do, you know, even if you just have a fall on the footpath, the pavements, you know, the sidewalk, you know, you look, see what's happened. You know, there I was looking at the whole of my arm completely exposed. It had been ripped open, and I could see every single nerve ending, every single sort of muscle. And I remember going, wow, that's me. That's the inside of me. And then it was just at that point that I went from all the sort of the franticness of the hospital and the sort of brightness of all the fluorescent strip to a beautiful darkened space. I'd left my body, and I'd gone somewhere really in a warm, comforting, darkened room, I thought it was at first. And I just kind of looked around me to see where I was, to get my bearings. And the first thing I noticed were these pulsating colors that were all around me. They were like sort of colors of ambers and yellows and reds and greens. And they were making me feel very calm and relaxed and secure. Straight away, I thought, you know, I'm dead. I actually thought I didn't make it. So here I am. Because I was worried. I didn't think I was. I was worried that I was going to make it when I was in hospital. You know, it was in I was in so much agony, and there was so much sort of negative, well, not negative, but a lot of frantic energy going on. So yeah, so I figured I hadn't made it. I figured I was dead. I didn't resist it. I was quite happy there. You know, it's not like I wanted to die, but after all the sort of drama that I've been through and all that, it was like it just felt great to sort of just be at peace and just feel really relaxed. Just kind of went with it, you know. Yeah. At first, I figured I was actually in a darkened room. I thought I was in a dark space, you know, because there wasn't a lot of light around. But I saw these orbs of colors that were almost greeting me, that were slowly pulsating all around me. Beautiful colors, you know, oranges, ambers, greens, and reds, you know. And as these colors pulsated, I started to feel relaxed and safe in this space, even though I didn't know where I was. And I tried to get my bearings, and I looked down, and I realized that I was no longer laid on the hospital trolley, but I was on a huge rock. It was like a big slate. I describe it as being like a medieval altar, you know, just for want of comparison. And the strange thing was, it was actually very comfortable to lay on. You know, normally you wouldn't. And I realized I was no longer clothed. I was just covered in this blue sheet. It was like a satin sort of silky material, which I felt comfortable in. I know, not comfortable. It felt comforting to have this kind of sheet laid over me. Yeah, so I laid back and I just closed my eyes and just kind of allowed myself to go with that moment. And it's almost like through my eyelids, I noticed that there was light coming through. And so I opened my eyes. And as I looked up, I gazed up and I saw the 3 grids of light, like symmetrical grids, closing in on me above my face, above my head and my body. And as I looked into this light, I realized that this light was so intense and so bright and white that I thought, how come I could look into it? Normally it'd be too bright to be able to gaze into, but I just couldn't take my gaze away, because I realized it was more than just light. It was like a healing force, a healing energy that was just healing all the trauma that my body had just been through, that whole horrific accident. So I lay back and closed my eyes and bathed in this light, because I felt that the energy coming from it was actually really something quite like nothing I'd ever felt before. It was like a vibration, you know. And I thought I should check out my body, you know, my wounds, see how everything's looking, you know. So I just kind of lifted my head and looked down, and everything was fixed. Everything was back in place. You know, my left arm that had been severed, there wasn't even a scratch or bruise, you know. And I was just covered in this like blue satin sheet, which was keeping me really relaxed and comforted. And this white light was just kind of reflecting off it, and it looked really beautiful. And then I felt the presence of somebody near me, and so I looked, and just at the edge of my sort of feet was this person that was just stood there, just staring at me. And this beautiful being, like a sort of an androgynous being, you know, just with this pure white blonde hair and this skin that was just glowing from within. This light was coming from within this being, and he or she was just wearing a contemporary black t-shirt. I remember thinking to myself, that's unusual. I expected to see something a bit more sort of ethereal, you know, but there you go. I'll take that, you know. But it was interesting because I felt like I'd known this person for a long time. You know, when you go to a party sometime and you meet someone for the first time and you connect and you chat and you both turn around and you go, I feel like I've known you for ages, for all my life. You know, it was like that, but it was a lot more intense. It felt like I'd known this person from my former life or whatever, you know. It was just, but I just couldn't work it out. I was kind of going, who are you? I know you, don't I? And he or she just kept smiling back at me reassuringly that, you know, I was sort of in the kind of, this was like the guardian of my soul, if you like. You know, I felt very protected by he or her. It continued on, you know, the experience. So I didn't come back straight away. I mean, I do remember coming back into my body. Yeah, it was quite a sort of a sudden crash, if you like, back in. But you know, there were a few other events that unfolded while I was there. That you know, there were more people started to appear. There were two female forms that appeared either side of me that were healing me. They'd got their hands just kind of slowly hovering over my body. And the energy that was coming from their hands just felt really powerful. It was almost like I felt like a vibration of love that was coming from their hands. You know, there was an overwhelming sensation of love throughout this whole experience. You know, it was just, and it was unconditional. The love was just like brilliant. It was just like all the different forms of love that I'd had throughout my life, whether it had been through lovers or animals or, you know, my parents or my family, you know, but it was all sort of condensed into this whole experience, and it was wonderful. But yeah, one of the most important things from the whole thing while I was there was I saw what many people see is a tunnel of white light, and this tunnel of white light appeared, and it was very huge, and it was like coming towards me. By this point, I'd realized that I wasn't in a small darkened room at all. I was actually in the universe itself, you know, and I was just like, there I was, and this thing was this beautiful tunnel was coming in, very powerful, and it was like all these flames are slowly rotating around the sort of perimeter, if you like, of this tunnel. And the energy coming from this was just so strong. It was just like I felt like every molecule of my body was just kind of like vibrating with this pure energy of love. And I just knew straight away. I thought, what I'm looking at now, this is the source of all creation. You know, this is God. It's not the God that we all pray to, who's normally in some kind of human form, you know, whatever our faith may be. It's a tunnel of white light. This is this huge tunnel which is edging in closer and closer, and this is the source of all creation. So that was the most profound sort of moment for me. And it was actually pretty much soon after that had happened that I found myself being thrown back into my body and back down in the hospital. Yeah. Later, because I went back to the spiritualist church, and there was a lot of mediums would be there and picking up a lot about me because this energy was still coming out of me. And one of them said, you know, the day you had your accident, you had a very strong power animal that was there. And I was going, wow, that's remarkable. That's great. I'd never heard of that before. And she said, yeah, that's what saved you. Yeah. That's what cradled you and relaxed you to go through and survive that. Because the British Rail Police spent a whole year doing their inquiries. You know, they pulled the car doors right down to the last rivet, you know. And when they finished all their stuff, you know, they said, well, we're finished now, David. And I said, okay. And I remember he turned around, the head of the police, and he said, look, we were all banging our heads together still. You should be dead. We did all our measurements. You should not have survived that. We don't get it. Consultant, you know, my surgeon, he was really amazed at how I was healing physically as well. He was just saying, you're healing really quick, you know. This is we're really, really pleased with how fast you were going, you know. And he kept saying to me all the time, we can't get over how fast you're healing. And I started to tell him, you know, about, well, you know, I think I'm being helped from, you know, and he was like, okay, that's enough, you know. He was like, don't tell me anymore. You know, I mean, he's a scientist. I mean, he's a wonderful guy. I mean, without him, I wouldn't be here, you know, actually, because in all fairness, when it happened, I didn't actually know anything about near-death experiences. And I actually thought, you know, that I was the only person this had happened to, not in an arrogant sense, but, you know, I just kind of figured, wow, that was incredible. And I thought, I can't wait to tell the world, and how am I going to tell them, you know? And so I started telling close family and friends, because I was in hospital for quite some time. So it was them that I started to tell. You know, I filtered through the people that I felt that I could talk to about it first, and then made my way through them all. But everybody that I told totally got it and was totally sort of drawn into the whole thing. And I could tell that there was nobody at all who was doubting my story. So that made me feel confident to be able to go out into the world, because I felt that it was very important to do it anyhow. You know, I was very keen to find out more about it. I mean, once I got out of hospital, I went straight online and I started to look in. I was Googling in, you know, what had happened. And I discovered what a near-death experience was, you know, and I started finding out more and more about it. So I realized that it was quite a common thing that would happen to other people. And that was great, because it made me feel like I was part of a sort of society. And it was like affirmation as well, you know. In fact, one of the most beautiful, moving things that happened was it was when I first started on my first painting. And I was looking online one day and I came across a story of a young girl who was only about sort of, you know, 6 or 7 years old, I think, and she'd had a near-death experience, and she'd done like this drawing, you know, with marker pens of what she'd seen in her near-death experience. And it was like, wow, it was just like a stick drawing, if you like a child would do, very crudely and honestly. And it was just like the painting that I was almost completing, you know, myself. And I called my sister and I said, come and see this. And she just went, oh my goodness. And she started welling up with tears. She said, that's your painting, that's your story, you know. So that was a wonderful moment.